So thank you so much also, Hans, for your introduction words. And I actually had prepared plenty of also words for myself to introduce you the topic and everything, but I don't think this is necessary anymore. So I will actually kick it off from this side, Juhan. The very first question that I actually want to ask all of you, and a very short answer also, this is what I'm expecting. So how do you actually define sovereignty in cyberspace?
Yes, it works. Good morning. It's a good question to ask. Unfortunately, I don't have a straightforward answer. We don't have in our legislation, which deals with cybersecurity, the notion of digital sovereignty. We do have a notion of strategic autonomy. You can find that in the NIS2 directive, also on the Constituent Act of the European Cybersecurity Competence Center. But clearly, the way how you define sovereignty in cyberspace is that you take security measures that allow you to block undue influence and maintain your sovereignty in the digital ecosystem. And I think that's how we should look into this. There are a number of complex things involved, but that would be my starting point.
All right, Jacques, the French view. You can, yes. There you go.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I am Jacques de la Rivière, the CEO of Gatewatcher. We are a cybersecurity company specialized in detecting threats on the network. And on my side, sovereignty is a big word, and it's very much used now. Even in France, we have a Ministry of Sovereignty and Economy. So like the Minister of Finance include the terms of sovereignty inside the title. And what I think is that sovereignty is very close to autonomy, as Juhan said, but also it is very much linked to the need of business. And as you know, that there is no business which is 100% independent. Everyone is linked with everyone, but at the end, the country which owns the most powerful industries is the country like Europe, which is the most powerful and the most sovereign. So on my side, I think it's mostly about business and how we ensure that the industries in Europe and in France are the most powerful to conquer new markets and ensure our autonomy on these technologies.
Thank you. My sweet friends in Finland, how do you define this from your side? And do you agree that Europe is the most powerful when it comes to autonomy in cyberspace?
Well, that's another question. But when I think about sovereignty, for me, it means self-governance, the ability to govern oneself. And when we add digital there, the digital essentially is inherently international. And as we know, a huge part of it is actually what we call the internet. We don't have distances, we don't have land mass, we don't have geography, and so on. So it's rather difficult to actually to say in simple words what it actually is. Especially when we talk about, for example, market conditions and the existence of the market. In European Union, we have something called the internal market, and so on. And that means that there is some kind of layer there. Anyway, to summarize, digital sovereignty essentially would be to looking at a little bit like inwards for me, not so much outwards. It's about the ability to govern the digital environment that you are supposedly in a similar manner than what we have done in the real world, in the world of atoms, for the last 400 years or so.
All right, François, what's your clear definition?
Yes, thank you. I'm François Esnol-Feugeas.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. In a few words, as Peter underlined, there's no landmass, there's no geography in cyberspace. But what there is in cyberspace is people. And the sovereignty in that way can be defined in the ability to protect the people from unfair practices. And the people of a country, the people of a state also include businesses. So it's also about being able to protect those businesses in the cyberspace. That's how I will define it, which means the focus has to be on the data, because what people are in the cyberspace, and I know it's a thing from, it's going to sound like a bad marketing firm, but people are data. And in a cyberspace, you have to protect people's data, and you have to protect who can access it and how they are exposed to the risk. Of course, there's an informational value as well, that you have to be able to protect them for bad information, for bad influences, and that's how you're going to ensure the sovereignty in a cyberspace, to me.
Thank you. So I would jump back to you, Juhan. If you think about it in general, like the role of like different big tech companies is increasing also a lot, especially when it comes to security in our cyberspace, and also for a lot of different European countries. How could actually Europe and different nations in Europe find this kind of balance when it comes to, again, the competition side, so that we still like allow these companies to operate and also work with us, but also still remain the fact that also our security comes first, and also obviously the sovereignty as well there. So what's your kind of secret, if you would if you would have all the, I don't know, let's say defense and IT ministers sitting here from different EU countries, what would be your like suggestion for them?
I don't think it's a very sort of fuzzy issue. It's actually quite clear. I mean, we are all realists and we understand that competition is a good thing. It drives innovation, better services, but also security. And it takes place in an environment where everybody respects rules, and the rules are clear and transparent and they're set. But being a realist, we also know that some do not play by the rules. So our rules also need to be nuanced, and they need to take that into account. And I liked what François said for the first question, that it's all about data in the end of the day. So let me bring you one example, and it's a very politically sensitive example, because it deals with one of the issues that my agency is currently undertaking, which is helping member states and the Commission to draft a new certification scheme for cloud service providers. And in the end of the day, it's about data, because that's what you put in the cloud. So, from the point of view of cybersecurity certification, there are numerous aims that the certification scheme needs to achieve. And one of them is to ensure that the data is not hampered, tackled, or accessed by third parties. Great. So there are a number of technical measures that you take into account, encryption, blah, 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 blah. But then you also know, and that's not a theoretical issue anymore, that there are countries that have taken laws with extraterritorial effect, so that they force their companies that provide cloud services in elsewhere in Europe to hand over data or get access to this data, a thing which is forbidden under the certification scheme. So how do you deal with this threat? Not all data is probably going to be accessed via these extraterritorial laws, but some might. And the most sensitive data then needs to be protected in ways that mitigate this threat. And I think that's what the there's a debate about the cloud certification currently is. So it's very much about, it's not a theoretical question of, how do you marry competition and sovereignty. It's very much about practical things that we do now. So we need to find these practical ways. How do we develop a rule book that at the same time provides competition, make sure that we do have it in the future, but also is realistic in terms of the threats that are actually facing us today. So we need to take proportional measures and targeted measures in order to mitigate these type of threats.
Continuing here and Jacques with you as well, like, could you bring it out a couple of also just the best practices or lessons that we have seen, especially by like finding this balance there as well, like fostering competition, and also this is also very positive impact on innovation and also new technologies and everything. But again, the autonomy part there as well. Is there any kind of very great lessons that you would like to share with our audience here?
So I think we still have to improve a lot in France and Europe to find the best practice, like about a fair balance in a competition. But if I take in our industry, which is a cybersecurity industry, most of the providers come from the US, and they spend more than 60%. Of their spending in sales and marketing. If you take a European company and French company in cybersecurity, most of them spend at the maximum 20% in sales and marketing. And it is, I think, a matter of mindset, because like we are much more techies in France and Europe. But also a fair access to capital and fair valuation, because like on the same range of turnover, European company will have a much lower valuation than US companies, so they will have access to less capital, so they will spend much less in sales and marketing, and that you know that to get on the market, you have to invest a lot on sales and marketing. And I want to share some insight about my experience. 1 year ago, we closed our first fundraising, 25 million fundraising with Move Capital. And after the fundraising, I was looking for a chief marketing officer to improve our sales and marketing and mostly marketing. I was not able to find any chief marketing officer in France which was able to create from scratch a strategy, because most of the CMOs in France were applying strategies coming from the US. So we have to build, as you said, a scheme for fair balance, but we also have to improve a lot in skills to be competitive.
All right, moving on back to Finland, up to north. Is there any kind of also different, I don't know, I would say like policies or strategies that you're mostly proud of that Finland has implemented in order to especially address this issue or to challenge in the market?
Yeah, I can raise at least one. If we start from the ground, the sort of fundamental facts, most information and computer systems are owned by private entities in any of the countries where we have participants here on this conference. So what can we do that factually help those organizations, they are namely companies, to boost their information security? What we've done in Finland is that we have opened a government voucher to invest in improving cybersecurity efforts that are factual, that are really technical / administrational, and so on. So it is a public support, essentially, funding for these investments, because we believe that this is something that is actually value for the entire society, because it's enough to have one significant cybersecurity incident that will cost more than the entire investment to support the companies. So that's what we have done. Of course, I would like to continue and talk more about what previous speakers were mentioning, but I don't know if we have time.
Yeah, of course, we have enough time. So all the reflections as well. If you hear something from many of the other panelists as well, just happy to hear.
All right. Well, in that case, if I'll challenge for the sake of debate and discussions, I'll challenge a little bit of what especially Mr. Lepassaar mentioned about the sort of immunity to extraterritorial regulations and so on. That indeed is really also factually true that it exists, but it exists. These kinds of same coercive powers do exist in the world of atoms as well. For example, in most of our countries, our intelligence services, security intelligence and others, they have extraterritorial powers. They can enter places and meet people and acquire information on the territory of other countries. And it's happening as we speak, and we consider it normal. So if that is true, but at the same time we also know that I'm at least very hopeful that, for example, our Chinese adversaries would not have access to our energy plants or other critical places. So what we actually do is that we solve the issue by way of having technical/administrational methodologies, mitigations to tackle this problem. And at least from the technical perspective, I'm rather convinced that it can be done in the digital sphere as well. So it's not necessarily so much about creating this kind of regulatory immunity. That is really difficult to if that choice is made, we will be limiting competition severely. And I'm not sure whether that takes us to a better place, but of course this is the moment to discuss and think about this.
To continue with you, François, he was just mentioning that there could be some of the steps that we do that are really limiting the competition here. Very good international collaboration, also not just again between companies and the states, but also between the states, and sharing this expertise would help there. Is there any country that you would kind of from France look up for and say that okay, their system is actually a very great example what we should also follow and especially the collaboration perspective there?
That's a really difficult question. Mainly because, to be frank, I manage a company called Oxibox. Oxibox is still quite early stage company. We are around 20 people now. We'll be 40 people at the end of the year. So we are at the start of our internationalization. But partnership with the state in order to help with international cooperation is obviously key in order to be able to develop a healthy ecosystem. And in that way, there cannot be too much help provided by states. But I don't have, sorry to answer the question bluntly, I don't have a very good example of a European state or otherwise that would be helpful, but not because they don't exist, because I don't know enough about this state, but about these issues. But I will say this on the topic at end and the issue that both Juhan and Peter went into. The key to bring together sovereignty and competition is and I think it was the point of Mr. De Vries and Minister Barrot earlier as well, is that there has to be fairness, and the rules have to be the same for everyone at some point. And obviously, when we talk about extraterritorial laws, there's a lot of noise in France, especially around the extraterritoriality, of American law, for instance, and extraterritorial activities such as intelligence, spying, and so on, do exist outside the bounds of the countries they take place in. If you spy in another country, you're not respecting the law of the other country. You're applying your own law in another territory. Meaning you can't force, it would be unfair to put backdoors in cryptography to stifle the ability of states to protect themselves in order to say, yes, but I do want to access the data. Yes, you want to, but the game is, we're not going to let you. You have to get this by technical means, by spying, but not by forcing someone to implement something weak in order to go into that. And I think it's really one of the key points is that in order for this to be fair, everyone has to, if it's a competition, in a sporting sense, we'll all have to bring our best game to the field.
Yeah, Peter, you wanted to add something as well?
Yeah, if you don't mind, it's just something that I feel that I should, once again, apologies if I'm too frank. Coming from the north, we don't really have manners, so apologies for that. But the reason why we need these kinds of events, like the Paris Cyber Summit, is really that if you feel sting from what I'm going to say, please don't be offended. This is not the intention of this question. But really, if you think about, for example, the RSA encryption algorithm, when it was weakened by the company's own decision so that the US intelligence services could utilize the weaknesses of it, how many of you or your organizations ceased to use it? How many of you disbanded this technology? Another question, when Meta, former Facebook, changed their algorithm to make even more profit in 2018, how many of you ceased using Facebook? I think we really need to sort of step our game in a way to understand what all of these mean and what they contribute to. Thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, of course.
Can
go
I
ahead.
perhaps elaborate on something that Peter and Jacques said before as well? I think when we started with this premise of what is digital sovereignty or why we are even talking about it, I think Peter said that it's about control, effective control. And I would very much agree with this. And in order to have control, you need different kinds of measures. You can't only rely on certain sets of capabilities, you need the full palette of capabilities in actually to ensure that you have effective control. And I think what Jacques said very importantly is that do we have the capabilities in Europe to be in control in our digital economy and society? And I think we can rightly say that no, we don't. And partially, I don't think that we have a problem with this because we have clearly an open market. We accept also that there are other players in the market, but we do require other players to follow our rules. And now we can speculate whether they do or not, but the requirement of following our rules is there. And that's why we actually do not accept when they don't follow our rules. I don't think that the European Court of Justice has accepted that intelligence agencies from the countries meddling into the data of Europeans is a reality that just needs to be accepted. If that would have been the case, Safe Harbor, the agreement that we had with the US, would not have been overturned. So they did not accept that. And I think finding out what are the capability gaps and how we can ensure that we will take measures in order to enhance our strategic autonomy in a manner that also not only becomes an autarky, but actually tries to use interdependence in a meaningful way. It's a hard question. There is no simple answer to this, but I think one of the things that I take from Peter as well is that you need to take mitigating measures if you know where your gaps are. And I think in this sense, one of the things that I heard yesterday, but also not only in the context of the Paris Cybersecurity Summit, is that if the Russian war of aggression has taught us anything, it is that the capabilities of the private sector are crucial. And not only of your own private sector, but of your partners and allies. So having a system that also includes the capabilities of your partners and allies into your own capability box, I think that's also something that we need to work on. So to look, so digital sovereignty doesn't mean that you need to do everything alone, but it does mean that you need to control your capability box.
I want to add some insight on this very nice intervention of our co-panelists. In France, we have France has been working on a strategy to improve sovereignty with increasing demands on the hardening of the product. It is a work that the ANSSI in France has been doing. ANSSI is the cybersecurity French agency, and on all the most of the certification of ANSSI are on the hardening of the product. The hardening is the ability of cyber products, cyber software, to resist to pen testing, hacking for a long time. And if you look at most of the products which are made out of Europe, the software companies mostly focus on the features of the products, which is very useful, of course, but they always forget about the hardening of the products. And I think Europe can play a great role by being stronger on the mandatory hardening of the product, which will give an advantage to European companies which are much stronger in hardening to access the market and to ensure stronger security on the product.
Thank you. So you already opened it up a little, like about the international law part. So this is actually very clear that in cyberspace, cyberspace really lacks of like the single forum or also international like domain organization who is regulating a lot of things happening. Because like we've been talking about that we do things here in Europe, but like Europe is not defining where the cyberspace is, because there's no kind of borders in Europe when it comes to, or in a word like in cyberspace there is no such thing as borders. So how do you feel like how this is influencing the entire, again, the collaboration side, the consequences if anything goes wrong, that we don't actually even have an international organization who can, decide these things and
well, I'm not sure an international organization will help with sovereignty, actually, because this international organization would become a political object. So there would be tensions, there would be debates. It would not be fully democratic, I believe, to go this way. And we can look at the DNS issues, the issues we have with DNS, where there is an international organization. And now there's talk of creating a sovereign domain name system in Europe, because maybe we don't have enough control on that international organization. So that, in a way, wouldn't work, and that's not even going into countries that are less democratic, let's say China, let's go all the way to North Korea. They're not looking at the cyberspace as something that's open and with no borders. They managed to create a border in the cyberspace in a way in order to make sure they apply their own laws. So you have to accept at some point, and really it's the same thing as the European Union. We went together and we worked to create a free flow of goods, people, and in the cyberspace there's a free flow of information. Free does not mean you can't regulate it, you can't control it, or you can't ensure it's fair. And for this, as Juan justly said, we have to work together. And working together does not mean working with everyone, it means working within a space of people we want to work with. So obviously this is the EU, I believe. But it does not work. It does not mean working without partners, without allies in this space. Well, I could build a bit on doing things together because, as you mentioned, you need to ensure your capacity to answer with your allies. And there's a tendency, as Jacques talked a bit into in France, to say we have to do everything in France. Everything has to be French in order to be sovereign. Obviously, this is a natural tendency, and it's a natural tendency in tech or in research. It's called the not invented here syndrome, which means you have to control your whole stack. You don't want to build upon something else. Every bit and cranny of your product has to be built in-house, so you're sure how it's made. But if you build everything like this, obviously, you're not going to be very competitive, are you? You're not going to be very efficient. So if you depend on public funds, you're going to hamper the ability to innovate of the whole state. And that's a tendency we have to work against in order to be stronger together. That's not the theme of this year. It was the theme of the year before. But yeah.
But Peter, from your perspective, is there any potential that we're going to have 1 point enough or in a balance in a way, if I could use this word again, like global norms and standards that are accepted by all of our allies?
I'd like to believe so. Especially here in European Union, we are on the way there. That's rather clear already. I think we all have heard the term regulatory tsunami that has hit us, or is hitting us in several waves actually, from the Commission and from the co-legislators. And this is mostly positive, at least to us. This is really mostly positive because there is not only for the internal market and the European Union and our way of life, but also because there is this what we call the Brussels effect. Everybody also has heard about this, and I don't want to dwell on that too much, but this is really positive because it has effects also on third countries and so on. And what I would like to kind of conclude maybe when we think about the competition, and I was talking about the RSA just now and the Facebook and so on, the point what I really try to make is that essentially if we understand well the technologies and the markets and so on, we should be better able to choose who we actually buy from and which technology we use. And that creates a better environment for the competition. When the facts are known, buy from manufacturers and companies that you can rely on, that make good products and solutions, and so on. And there's plenty in Europe, so that is not the issue. On the other hand side, what I would like to, this is my personal kind of conclusion to this point, is that we shouldn't be maybe fixing some of our issues and problems that we indeed have in essentially like doing wrong things for the right reasons. And for example, the fact that our digital market is fragmented. It's not really internal. also, we have underdeveloped funding, for example, for digital digital products and solutions, including cybersecurity. We also have challenges in bankruptcy. You know, in Europe, when you go bankrupt, that's like a jail sentence. It's not in the US like that. So failing fast is much easier there. Also the talent migration. We have challenges in Europe on this. The Czech Republic, the Czech, they don't want to move to Finland and so on. And it seems that, for example, our Estonian colleagues, they liked to move to Finland and then they moved back and so on. So that's how it works. So we have challenges in Europe. And to solve these challenges, trying to solve them by creating more, let's say, emphasis on the sovereignty side and protecting, ending up in a protectionist environment is not going to solve these fundamental issues. By the way, these are some of the most recent research findings, for example, from Professor Anu Bradford from US. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that we have 2 microphones as well here. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, but can we also ask questions from the audience? Is there anybody with something related to the topic that would like to also raise a question? If not right now, yes, Juhan? There is somebody? Okay. Was there? No? Yeah, you can, the microphone is right over here, so... And also please to introduce yourself and then also say who this question is meant for. Thank you.
Okay, Juhan from Idacto. I have a question maybe for ENISA in particular, but maybe not. We hear a lot at the European level that everything now needs to be developed as open source. I have nothing fundamentally against open source, but my question is, are we shooting ourselves in the foot? As was mentioned in this panel, we're very good at developing tech. We're very bad at selling it. If we keep developing things, funding developments and putting everything open source and then just giving it out to others who can sell it better, are we shooting ourselves in the foot? I think we should also remember that in terms of transparency, because people say we need open source for transparency. Europe is very good with common criteria certifications for security, etc., which do provide a seal of security. So I was wondering what your opinion was at ENISA on this subject.
Well, it's quite easy because my mandate demands that I'm technology neutral. So you will not hear me saying bad things about open source, nor bad things about proprietary. But I think it's about balance, and we talked about transparency, and I think that's very important. We need to understand and know what bits and pieces go into the things that we construct in cyberspace. And this leads me, actually, if I may elaborate now on this, and I just hijack your question, to contradict a bit the notion that there are no borders in cyberspace. I've heard it very many times, and it's taken as for granted. And I have a bit of a problem with this, because the assets that we use are physically located somewhere. They are not in the moon. And if we continue this constant mantra that there are no borders in cyberspace, that means that if we need to fight cybercrime, it would be like Emperor Caligula declaring war on the North Sea. But no, there are actually jurisdictions that harbor cyber criminals. There are jurisdictions that do not take care of their responsibility of ensuring that their assets cannot be misused. And there are, of course, jurisdictions that maliciously do this stuff. We can attribute in cybersecurity. Not ENISA, but member states do that. And I think it's very important that we do go clearly after jurisdictions and say, your house is not in order. So this notion of no borders in cybersecurity, I understand where it comes from. Data flows across borders, but it flows across borders from one country to another country, etc. So, and I think it's important that we do recognize this responsibility as countries, as regions, as jurisdictions, because that's part of the key of solving the cybersecurity puzzle. And I go now back to what Hans said in the beginning. I think it was embrace the CISO, empower the CEO, or something like this. I very much like that, because in the end of the day, it's about our own responsibility as professionals. No matter if you're a chief cybersecurity officer or CEO, you need to take responsibility of this. And what we've seen around, that ENISA has done surveys of operators of essential service providers and asked them, okay, how much do you actually invest in cybersecurity? And how much from this is due to the fact that you have to implement the NIS2 regulation? And what we've seen is more than 60% said that actually they invest only because of this. Otherwise, they would put their money elsewhere. And it's normal. I mean, if I'm a hospital, I would probably invest in curing people rather than making sure that my machines are cyber secure. But okay, we demanded that they do that. But the CEO still hasn't realized that this is something that is intrinsic in their business risk. They still see it as an IT problem. So they measure also the cybersecurity investments as percentage of their IT budgets. The median in Europe was 6.7. Across 1,000 companies that we surveyed. And I'm saying, is it too big or small or whatever? What I'm saying is it's not enough. And the only way we can ensure that we actually take this sovereignty issue seriously is that we actually put money there. So if we want these capabilities that we talked about, we need to invest, not only as countries, but also as business leaders, as CEOs, as politicians. And I'm sure, in the end of the day, somebody will mention skills, either in this panel or in the next one. And I've never once participated in a conference where somebody would have said that we have a big problem because we have a lack of lawyers. However, during my tenure as an executive director, 3.5 years, every conference, there is somebody who says, we don't have cybersecurity professionals. So what have we done wrong? That we have enough lawyers, they're well paid, and everybody wants to go there, but we have something that hampers people to go to cybersecurity. Is it us? Is it the CEOs? Is it the educational system? What is it? But we don't have a problem with lawyers. So I'm just saying that that it's also part of the capabilities and capacities that we think about. So do we have the people? And we need to invest in order to have them. We need to give them good salaries, we need to invest in the education, and we need to give them a career path. Sorry for being so long. No, I was very interested. Yeah, with the word to you.
If I can just go back to Jan Bouhan's question, because you hijacked it, but maybe if I can go back to the open source question a bit, that's a good question because it's a little bit provocative, and I'm going to add provocation to it. Promoting open source is not shooting ourselves in the foot because we put way too much focus on tech, because it's not so much about technology, about code, source code, but it is about adoption, and that builds on what you were saying, Peter. How many of us have stopped using Facebook when they became a little bit more offensive in their data reuse? Well, what's the alternative? It's not because we do have the tech in Europe, we do have the tech in France, we do have the tech in Finland, we do have the tech everywhere. We have the tech. Is it deployed? Is it usable? Is it usable by the companies that need to use it? Is it usable by the people who need to use it? Maybe it's not accessible enough. And source code is not something that's really actionable as is. You have to invest in sales, in marketing, in order to bring your product to market and to drive adoption to the product. So maybe there's too much of a focus on R&D, on technology, on source code, and not enough on usability, on accessibility of the solutions, on ease of deployment, and so on and so on. So that's actually, I'm building to
Peter.
larger question then.
Yeah, very shortly. It just reminds me perfectly a discussion I had with my organization, our head of communications. I was presenting some rather solid facts. So this is already some time ago on the application called TikTok, and what it actually does, and what are the technical sort of features, and how obvious it is that there is a secondary use case for the application, and it's not funny videos. But you know what I got the response? The first response was, yeah, but all the young people are there. So, yeah, what's the alternative? That is really challenging to solve, because many of these really significant players, although this particular example is not, but most are coming from the US, and as you know, it is a casino model, which means that only one can be the winner. So it's very difficult to establish competitive settings and enough sort of flat ground to compete in this way, because some of the fundamentals that I was already mentioning are not on our side, at least yet. But we also heard from the French minister just now that also part of the regulatory tsunami, we are also getting there via those new regulations. So it will help at least.
Any questions from the audience? Since you now had time, any curious minds that would like to address our speakers here? Do I see any hands? No? Okay, so we have a little more time to think about what you want to ask as well.
I'm sorry. I just want to add some insight on the question of Juan. Why do we have so much lawyer and so few experts? I just want to make a record that cybersecurity is just new, and I mean it's not new, but it is news that it is sexy. It was not before, and when I created a Gatewatcher more than 8 years ago, I was never invited on such a nice venue and such nice panel. So like now it is trendy, sexy, and it is very much strategic, but it is new. And law is not new, legal issues are not new, and I think that all the light we are getting from the last 2-3 years will bring more experts, and why it is important to embrace the CISO is because like they also came from the cave to the light, and they need support because they're having a lot of pressure, and this can be done like for the CISO, but also for all the European cybersecurity industry and companies who are fighting with less means, but greater creativity and willing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Definitely will take on board this notion that cybersecurity is sexy. I do believe in this. My point about, I mean, I love this phrase of you need to embrace this, etc. But I think it goes beyond than that, because what our survey gives us is that most companies, well, let's say the essential service providers, the ones that we say, okay, you are the critical service provider, you need to take cybersecurity seriously. They still take cybersecurity seriously because the law tells them to do that. They don't take it seriously because they regard this as part of their essential business risk, and that's a big difference there. Whereas if you ask these companies whether they take their liability when it comes to GDPR seriously, yes, they do, and that explains the army of lawyers and the very minuscule amount of people who deal with cybersecurity.
I actually want to go back to the point that Juhan was also making before. I mean, we all know what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, and I'm always very, negatively surprised how little we talk about what happens in cyberspace in Ukraine as well at the moment, and since already not just 24th of February, but way before that. So if we especially try to think about the current topic that we're discussing here, what have been the key lessons, especially like you said, how big of a role that actually also private sector companies played in that case as well. So what has been, from the Finnish perspective, have you analyzed this? What could have been the lessons that we could learn from that point?
Well, yeah. The challenge is that when you asked, did we have plenty of course, various perspectives to it. Our defense forces are analyzing from their perspective. Our National Cybersecurity Center is analyzing from their perspective. Companies are analyzing from their perspective, and us as representing the cybersecurity industry that is operating in and from Finland, we are of course analyzing from our perspective, and these are not leading to the same conclusions. Some may be, for example, the fact that, but I think, for example, I don't think it may have been that the case Ukraine may have shown something to us, but I don't think it was something that it was kind of a wisdom that was found in Ukraine that companies are actually the key in making sure that the computer systems and information systems are protected. Because, for example, why to talk about cybersecurity in the first place if we don't have let's say an adequate level of vulnerability management and so on, because that's security patches have to be applied, because otherwise somebody will exploit the vulnerabilities and so on, and it doesn't matter where that information system is, that will be the result, and it doesn't matter even if it's IT or OT or whatever. So that's of course it. And who makes those patches is the manufacturers themselves, who have created those products and solutions, be it software or hardware or a combination of. So that's definitely it. But I think some issues have additionally been raised, and I think it's also, I'm not sure whether it's coming directly from Ukraine or as part of, and maybe part of realizing something. For example, our friends in the south, in Estonia, the openness of communicating about cybersecurity incidents and events, and also the geopolitical aspect of it, be it, for example, once again, about espionage and other things, and this openness from the government to the public to understand what's really going on, that is really, really valuable lesson. And I think it has to do something with Ukraine originally. But of course, it may have happened also without.
And so you were.
I don't have the pretension to give the key takeaways of Ukraine. There's a lot to unpack there, but I'm going to say that an expression of the sovereignty of Ukraine was the capacity to resilience and to cyber resilience, because to ensure they've been able to continue to exist even though there were building destroyed, there were city destroyed. You can't restart a city, you can't rebuild a city, but you can't restart and rebuild systems and have, a cyber resilience strategy when the worst happens. And it happened at a state level, so that's something that's a bit new. I can't think of any other examples on that scale in recent history and in cyberspace, which means and this is a way to ensure the sovereignty of a country, even if you go to the worst, and that's not the way Ukraine is going to go, but if your country is wiped off the map, in a way it can continue to exist if you've been able to restart services to make the country exist in a way in the cyberspace. So obviously, again, not wishing that to Ukraine or anything, but this capability, I think, is the best expression of sovereignty.
Right. Any reflection from your side as well, especially looking at the French case as well? I had a very great meeting last year at Anett here in Paris as well, and they showed me the numbers of how much also the attacks against small and medium companies here in France since the start of the war have increased. So what's your takeaway, especially from that side, and maybe especially like the collaboration between these small and medium companies or private sector in general would be?
Okay, so if I want to be very schematic, in France, ANSSI mostly communicate with a big corporate company, and SMBs and citizens communicate with another organization which is called Cyber Malveillance, which is more for SMBs and small companies. So in France, ANSSI, but I'm not a member of the ANSSI, so I just give a big picture of, from my point of view, how it works. Mostly regulate the way companies need to certify and to operate their services and products to give fair access to the market. And especially as Juan said, like in France we have this law, this legal framework about protecting critical infrastructures, and it gives 22 rules to every one of them that they need to comply with, and if you want to be able to provide those services and those products, you have to be certified by ANSSI. So it is open to every company, French or European or even outside of Europe, but you have to invest in this certification framework, which gives you local access to this local market and makes everyone improve the level of cyber.
To actually start wrapping up our panel discussion already, maybe give the last word to you, to Juhan, so we'll do it around here. What would be your main key takeaway from our discussion here? Or again, I've been asked this already a couple of times, but your suggestion for the future, how to find this very widely used word balance here?
Yeah, I was actually about to use the word balance, but you took it from me. I think the way is that we need to be realistic of what we can do and what we can't do. We need to find ways to mitigate the gaps that we know. There are a lot of things that we don't know, and I think it's always intellectually interesting to, dwell deep and try to find out what might happen, scenario A, B, C, D, E, F. But there is still a lot of things that really in real life happen, we know, and we don't do about it. So I think focusing on what we can do in this particular moment of time in order to enhance competitiveness of our cybersecurity landscape, but also ensuring that we can control our cyberspace is very important. It's just one example of all the significant incidents that are reported to ENISA. 67% of them happen because of exploitation of known vulnerabilities. But we are focusing sometimes on theoretical things rather than taking care of the things that actually might change the world now. Thanks.
Jacques, the last word for you.
I will also start by the same word, balance. I think we have very strong skills in Europe and in France, and we have all what we need to reverse this dependence of outside software. So we need to invest more in the companies with more capital and more access to the market, specifically public market.
All right, from the wise French words to Finland.
Thank you. I'll take a risk now, and I'll say that sovereignty is the competition, because we started to discuss about the what sovereignty actually means, digital sovereignty, and it is about, at least for me, about self-governance. So when we govern our competitive landscape well and make sure that we have more than our own domestic market available to us, that's where we find a good way to increase our sovereignty, because it is the businesses, it is the companies who create not only the wealth, but for the ability to materialize the fundamental rights and freedoms that is on the basis of Europe and its values.
The very last word to you, François.
Well, my conclusion has been stolen. But I agree. There's no opposition in a way between sovereignty and competition. You need one to have the other. You can't have sovereignty if you don't have competition, because if you're in a monopolistic market, you don't have choice. If you don't have choice, you can't have sovereignty. It's what Minister Barrow talked about as well, the ability in DSA and DMA to ensure reversibility, the ability to change providers, the ability to make other choices is key in order to ensure sovereignty. So it's what you were saying, obviously, and the way that sovereignty helps competition. So you need both, and it's not a question of balance, but each feeds on another, and it's a question of defining sovereignty in a non-limiting manner, so you can build upon it to have a competition.
So these are the great words to sum it up what we just talked here, and obviously cyberspace really presents a very unique complexities when it comes to governance and regulations, but also massive opportunity to make sure that our information is safe, our citizens' information is safe, and we can live peacefully here by in a digital world in a way. But from my side, I want to say a very massive thank you to all the panelists here, and please do join me for a round of an applause for our panelists.